Hi, and welcome to Fair Perspectives, the official podcast of the pro-human movement, brought to you by the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I'm your host, Melissa Chen, and my co-host, who you will hear from shortly, is Angel Eduardo. Today we have a special episode. FAIR is releasing a short film from filmmaker Daisy Wu, starring friend of FAIR, Ye Pogue. Our conversation today is with Ye and Daisy, but first we are proud to present their film, The Chinese Box, which touches on how government reinforces racial categories, often against the will of people who feel flattened by those categories. For those of you listening on the audio feed, you can find a link to watch the film in the episode's description. Xiaowen Daisy Wu is currently an international student studying film and television production at the University of Southern California. She previously finished her undergrad degree at Boston University. Her work explores identity, feminism, and social issues. Dr. Ye Pogue is a health policy researcher and behavioral scientist. She explores the concept of identity in American culture through writing. Because of her experience of living and coping with bipolar disorder and its stigma, she has developed a unique way of seeing the world through common humanity. She writes for Psychology Today's blog, The Human Identity, and her work has been published in Newsweek and on FAIR Substack. She is also the vice president of the nonprofit organization, Asian Americans for Equal Rights. And now, I bring you The Chinese Box.
What makes me being me? This is a question I always ask myself. What defines who I am? I believe the journey of life is to figure this answer out. But I was surprised that politics had answered that for me. Since 2017, Massachusetts has been considering adding national origin boxes on every government form, like Chinese, Indian, or Korean, to study and appreciate diversity among Asian communities. They said it was to collect disaggregated race data. According to government statistics, I'm a Chinese woman. I'm good at school, but not English. Have a high income, but more likely to have a mental disorder. This is how they think of me. I hate to be treated as numbers, not as a human being with thoughts and feelings. My life is not data for scholars, politicians, or special interests. Activism is about persistence. I voice my disagreement from different angles. I testified that the data sampling method is not scientific. They said this data is important. I explained it's stressful to ask immigrants' nationality. They repeated this data is very important. I argued asking Asian Americans where are you really from is a microaggression. They said it again. We must have this data to provide language services. But Chinese is not even a language. I have been repeating this for 3 years. The politicians do not want to listen to a Chinese person. But they certainly want Chinese data. My every advocacy trip ends at a Chinese restaurant. After I left my activist peers at State House, I walked to Chinatown alone. I mourned the innocent young lady who I once was. When I was in the restaurant, I bent in. Nobody paid special attention to me. I feel free. On this journey, I question who I am, and here's my answer. I'm an Asian. I am Chinese. I'm a woman. I have an invisible disability. All these factors definitely shaped my experience. However, I'm beyond all combinations of these boxes and labels. What really defines me are my choices, not the things I'm born into. It's a battle over who defines my identity. I will keep the fight.
Hey, Daisy. Hey, yeah. How are you guys?
Good.
Welcome to Fair Perspectives. Very excited to have both of you on. That film, that short film that I saw at least was very interesting and very well shot. But I want to get a sense of who both of you are. What is your journey? What is your story? How did you guys get here to be talking to us today? Want to go first, Daisy?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Daisy. I'm currently a first-year grad production student at USC, and the film was made when I was an undergrad at Boston University. It was supposed to be a film we had like a student assignment in the production 1 class. We're supposed to make a nonfiction portraying someone that is out of the BU bubble. So literally speaking, Ye was the only person I know who is like outside BU. But by that time, I actually never ever talked to her. But like we had a mutual friend, so we had our like contact info on the social media. I have like by that time I knew that she was like doing this like advocacy trip for a long time. I've been following her journey throughout like WeChat moments, and I took the courage and contacted her. It was the best thing of my life.
Thank you so much. Such a nice introduction. I can introduce myself. So I'm Ye Pogue. I was not political active at all until I encountered that bill, Asian data desegregation. I was very, very shocked and jumped in. And so I came to US as an international student. I studied economics. And then I went into the field of public health. And then I found, wow, there are so many policy making talk about public health. And in the name of helping me, Chinese American woman. And then I really realized, wow, it didn't seem like it's working. And so I speak up. And I thought just speak up will make a difference. Then I found, no, you know the case. You get really to speak up loud and persistent, relentless. And so I post a lot of stuff on social media about what I have done. And then I caught the attention of Daisy. And then that's how we started to have this project.
Interesting. Okay, so from what I understand of the film, it's addressing a lot of questions about identity, and in particular, it's about a pan-ethnic identity, right? It's this idea that it's a bureaucratic category called Asian Americans, and all of us get kind of stuffed under that. It's a very big category, and you're kind of wrestling with issues of whether it's the political or social consequences of this categorization. Do you want to kind of expound a little bit more? Because you said there was a particular bill that wanted to disaggregate identity or race, and that's what led you to this. Do you want to expound a little bit more on I don't know what that story really is like this?
Of course. So for me, now I'm a board member, a vice president of an organization called Asian Americans for Equal Rights. But I never really think Asian is my identity because I come from a different country. Clearly, come here, I will feel there is a label category has been forced upon me. So I run an organization for a cause, and then to improve the people's welfare of our people of our Asian origin. And then I was so frustrated when I know there are some folks, they want to kind of, this sounds like disaggregate Asian. Say we want respect. We are not Asian, we are Chinese, Korean, blah, 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 blah. And I respect that sentiment. But for me, it's actually racialize people, racialize Chinese into a new group. Why I say that? When I was trying to oppose it, I come from two angles. The first one is I don't think this categorization actually works any better than Asian. Chinese is also still very, very broad. People who came here 100 years ago and people who came here yesterday, doesn't make sense to group together. And you want to make that as some foundation for policy. I think it's bad policy making. That is for me professionally. The second is I found people kind of cling onto something they born into. And like, oh, I'm Chinese. Chinese means a lot for me. And I need to orient my life as a Chinese American person or as a Chinese person. And I was very surprised because people seem to assume when you disaggregate a group, you suddenly found something meaningful because Asian is such a large group. So it's not meaningful enough. When they put you in a smaller box, life makes sense now. I was very, very frustrated by that. So it doesn't make sense for me. It makes less sense for me anymore. So that's why I speak up. First, as a researcher, I said policy makingly, no good. Second is as a human being, I don't think that is an identity I feel really valuable for me and for many people who think like me. And that's why how I jump in this discourse.
Now, Daisy, what about this particular thing resonated with you? Why did you want to make a film about this? You could have made a film about anything.
True. I'm now like still an international student, like, being here as a Chinese person and, trying to blend in has been always something that we were trying to do. And like, reminds me of how I started out like here in freshman year and just like constantly has the struggle of like, who am I in this like new country? I'm trying to, study here. But on the other hand, like, do I hang out with like my Chinese friends? Do I try to socialize with other people? I think like the central question I've been always struggling is like, who am I? Like, how should I, supposed to just like live and study here?
So there's all these interesting tensions, right? Because I remember, Melissa, in an earlier podcast episode, you mentioned how you didn't know you were Asian until you got to the United States. Suddenly you're Asian. And that's this category that seems meaningful to people. And people willfully kind of put themselves into that box. And I can see the objections there, right? But I can also, Ye is also going a step further and saying even Chinese is kind of reductive. But I guess the question becomes, how far do you go and what is the utility of any of these things? Is there any utility? What do you think?
I can answer this. So for me, I feel the problem is I also feel Asian was forced upon me. That is no problem. When I answer questionnaires, become a scholar, I help many people answer their questionnaire. So when there is a race box, just click Asian. For me, it's just a geographic region. Clearly, I'm from Asia, right? It just had no meaning for me. It doesn't matter until it suddenly become a tool of policy making. Then I start to think, wow, this thing has policy meaning now. That makes me think. And then I think the other is for identity reason. People put more emphasis, more weight under that label, both Asian and Chinese, more than I think it deserves. So race is engineered category. I always tell people, I said, hey, who created race? White supremacist, not anybody else. And then why cling on to that? It doesn't look like it's reasonable. And so after I learned this, I said, no, I don't want that. I don't want that have feeling, have meaning. But we did have some racist problem in this country, like Chinese Exclusion Act. It has some meaning, but I don't want to make the meaning, make it internalized into me, make myself like a group who has been identified as a victim. I think to make the society better, we need to acknowledge that past, but not make ourselves a part of that past. And then that is, I think, the important is not that I put me into the Asian box or Chinese box. Like Chinese is real. I'm proud, very proud of being Chinese. I'm very authentically Chinese. But I don't want people, when they see a box, they make a lot of assumption about me. And then they think oh, it must be important for Ye in certain way without even asking me. I think that's the problem.
I think it's really interesting also when we decide to disaggregate the umbrella term Asian American and when we don't, right? And so when you look at what's going on with the crimes on the street, with Asian Americans kind of getting, a lot of these viral videos of older Asian people getting beat up on the streets, whether it's in Chinatown in New York or San Francisco, there's this AAPI hashtag stop AAPI hate, because that's kind of the new term. Instead of just Asian American, it's AAPI. And now they added 2 more letters to that alphabet soup. It's now AAPI-NH because Native Hawaiians are now distinct from just Pacific Islanders.
Oh, wow.
And then when you have college admissions, for example, all of a sudden when that issue is concerned, there's this drive to actually disaggregate Asian American, because Asian Americans are no longer considered a diversity play, right? Where we're not underrepresented anymore. And so they try to break it down. What is it with South Asians? Is it Hmong Americans? And that's kind of like, this game that they play with, like disaggregating, not disaggregating. When do you identify with the smaller group identity, the pan-ethnic identity? It's kind of like the Hispanics, right? It's the same kind of term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, man.
But at least for Hispanics, I think there's even more of a common cultural shared culture, because at least Hispanics share at least 1.5 languages. Most of them speak Spanish.
Most, yeah.
And Portuguese, right? But Asians are like anywhere from Tajikistan to Japan. It's just an even crazier, bigger area with more diverse cultures and religions.
Actually, we do share something similar. We share one history. It's being excluded from immigration because started with Chinese Inclusion Act.
Yeah.
And then it was expanded to Japanese and then expanded to all Asian. But we shouldn't define ourselves using that, right? It's a very sad history. And I think we can sometimes sit together and talk about it. But I don't think it's a strong justification to make it something just so real, because it's always human brain loves category. When no matter how we divide people, after you make divide, you will find it makes sense. Like you can divide Chinese into other ways, like Kantonese speaking Chinese, Mandarin speaking Chinese, and people will say, yeah, it makes so much sense. So I just feel a lot of times how we divide people, or should we do it at all? That is really something we need to talk more, but there is not enough conversation about it.
That's a great point. That's a great point, because it's making me think, we don't really talk about it in the context of Asian Americans or Asians in general. We know a lot about it in, the history of slavery and that group becoming some meaningful designation, and people who have that shared history of, ancestry of slaves and turning that into a community based on that ancestry. But we don't really hear about it very much in terms of Asian American. That's a really interesting thing that it's weird that I've never even considered it that way. And it is strange to group yourselves based on this historical, oppression. But the other thing you said about, the human brain loves categories. We do, and we can't help it, right? But it's interesting how far we can subdivide, right? So just thinking of, you're British, but you're not just British, you're English, but you're not just English, you're a Londoner, but you're not just a Londoner, you are from this specific little neighborhood that has its own accent. And people can tell just from hearing you speak where exactly you're from in London. And probably there's even more subdivisions within that, like, oh, you're from this block versus the other block. And I can see, so my question is, I can see how sometimes it makes sense to designate myself, for example, as someone who lives in New York, or even further, someone who lives in Queens, right? Or then go up further and say, someone who lives in America, and then someone who is a child of immigrants. Like all these categories are in some way accurate, and they may give some detail about who I am, depending on the level. But then there's also all these other ways in which it erases who I actually am and the assumptions you mentioned. Mm-hmm. But can you see any utility in doing this? You mentioned you're proud of being Chinese, but that it doesn't really encapsulate who you are. Does it? What meaning does it provide for us to know that you're Chinese?
So, Daisy, do you want to answer this question?
I feel like when I bring up like the topics that I'm Chinese, like what I'm actually want people to like know is just, I hope they could like sit down and really talk to me. Like, where is your hometown? How do you grow up? Who's your family? What do you really like? When I bring up like this sense of I'm I'm a Chinese, I'm sharing my proud. I just like is very ready to share my like life experience, my culture, but I just like feel like people sometimes just, oh, you're Chinese, and bam, that is the end of the topic. They get the answer and they pass it. And I was like, no, I want to say more, but they're like, okay, you're Chinese, I know.
Chinese is interesting also because it's a nationality, it's a culture, it's an ethnicity. Because I get asked that question all the time, are you Chinese? And I'm like, do you mean from China? Do you mean, do I speak it? Right? So there's this other complication, at least with that term itself.
Yeah, that's true.
That is really a good question, because I should say those labels, those groups, like what Daisy said, she wants to talk about what is really her life, right? Chinese is being an important aspect of her life. And when she really wants to get into it, talk about it, people say, I know about you now. You're Chinese. Done. Right? I feel one disadvantage of having those labels is it makes people very lazy. Like, oh, I know Chinese, and I know you are Chinese. And in the future, when I have a question about Chinese food, I'm going to ask you. So I want to buy a ticket to China, tell me where to buy it, right? That's the mental shortcut. You see, it has its utility, right? Now you know how to organize your information. You use that organize your information. And but there is a danger of it. Because our census classification, do you know there is a coded microaggression, for lack of better word? Asian people, say people who are classified racialized Asian, they hate the question, what type of Asian are you most? They hate the question, what type of Asian and where are you really from? They hate it. And at the same time, people want to say, I'm proud to be Chinese. That is very, very self-contradicting, right? One side, they feel they are not respected because people, just like Daisy said, I want to know where are you really from, end of it. And they feel they have been shut up. And then the other is that they want to feel they really belong. They want to have a sense of their holistic self. I guess it means including their ethnic identity. So they want to talk about it. I see this really complicated issue when I was navigating in this Asian world, because I never thought it would be important. I just want to click a box to help the researcher so the data is complete. It just had no other meaning. And after I really talked to the Asian American, I mean the people who born here, grew up here, I found they assign the word both Asian and Chinese. There are way more meaning associated with that. So I cannot speak for them. For me, I feel being Chinese is a fact, and I like my heritage, and I hope my future child, I don't have them yet, but when I have it, I hope they can identify as half Chinese. And I want that happen. But how the kids and their peers feel about what it meaning of being Chinese, I'm clueless about that. I'm still trying to understand, because it becomes personal for me after I know those people, their struggle. So I see those fight over the census box or data disaggregation. It's really way more than policy making. At the beginning, I thought it's simple. This is a bad policy because if you want to disaggregate, you need to do more, like figure out who is the immigrant, who is not, where they're from, they come as refugee or other class of people. And that's how you make policy decision. And I think it's very easy to think, okay, because Chinese is broad, so we definitely don't want to group it from a huge category to another huge category. But people really, I mean, the second generation Chinese immigrant, the children grow up here, they are super passionate about that box. And it must have some really good stuff for them. And later I work with them a little bit together to try to get the Chinese American history into curriculum. And FAIR is doing a great job of doing that. And I feel maybe they feel there is a Chinese box. It means they are seeing themselves somewhere in the society. Just like Daisy feels, no, there are people really want to listening to her rather than just say, okay, I saw your face. I know who you are. Bye. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that point. It's actually quite profound. Like you and like Daisy, I'm first generation too. Actually, I'm not even first generation. I'm the immigrant. I chose to come here. I wasn't born here, and I don't have grandparents who moved here. And I find that immigrants are far more alike than native-born Americans. There are just certain shared experiences, shared cultures, shared values that are a bit more, salient among immigrants. And
you mean immigrants of any kind, of any
kind. So it's almost like just knowing that you are the one that you are the one that chose to immigrate here and had to adapt to America already means that we share more because we had to learn the same things and go through the same process than an Asian American who's third generation, who's grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, and went to high school here and is completely Americanized and completely assimilated into the culture. And so I will have far more in common with, I don't know, a South Asian, somebody, an immigrant from Bangladesh than an Asian American who I share that big box racial category that you were talking about. And that's actually a very profound point about when something is meaningful and when it's not. And I actually can't help but be a bit more cynical about this because I see this census category as a way to create a voting bloc. It is a very useful voting bloc. I mean, I think Asian Americans account for 7.2% of the entire US population. And kind of having that category makes them a more powerful, a minority to be reckoned with. And so, we had this interesting conversation with, actually, Angel and I talked to Thomas Chatterton Williams, who was explaining to us that in France, they do things very differently. They actually don't collect racial data. And so if you want to even find out what is the crime rate of a certain subset of, I don't know, the Arab population that, is living in France, you can't really know that because they have quite explicitly colorblind policies. And so Angel's question about what is do you see any utility is an interesting question to debate on because I think other countries do things very differently. And France shows an example of a country that does not want to consider these labels, doesn't use them. And so can you, if there are problems, do you know what they are and how to fix them? Which is an interesting question because what is the alternative, I guess, to having this system that we have in America?
Yeah, I feel this is a very fine line to walk because as a researcher, I love data. We love to categorize people, which really like it. But the problem is not collect data. If we just collect data and people don't think that is important, it won't be a problem. Say we can classify the society into different groups and we use it to diagnose some problem. For example, we want to know in Chinese, when they go to hospital, do they have enough access to language service? That is I would say that information could be useful. However, there's a balance. If we make it so meaningful and use it to orientate our whole life from who you are to which school you go, what culture you belong, who you identify with, and from the day of birth to the day of death, I feel that is a problem. And like the classification is done by government. I kind of feel, I have been thinking about it a lot, Melissa. I have the same question. Because those data collection has its utility, but how to make sure we are not going that far? Like sometimes I feel, let's don't even have it. And sometimes I feel it can use for diagnostic purpose. So my answer is, I don't know. But I want to make sure, since we already have it, I really want to make it detached from the person. It can reflect some societal issue, but if we make it a part of you, that's what I feel that is too much. That is totally going a wrong direction. That's how I feel.
I was just trying to find it, but I saw this headline that just said, research shows Latino voters are very much like all other voters. Like this is like a fascinating discovery that this group that you've put together that actually has no meaning because there's so many disparate cultures within it. They have the same thoughts and feelings and differences between them and among them as anybody else. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Melissa's right about, basically what we're doing is creating voting blocks so that then we can take action in certain ways. But I wonder if the trade-off is worth it, right? Because then you think about, we need to get the Latino vote. We need to get the Asian vote. But what is the Asian vote? And the implication is automatically there that all these people that you've grouped together think the same. And so there's one policy to attract this one group of millions of people. And, again, like with the subdivisions, Melissa, you mentioned that immigrants have a lot in common, right? But you can even subdivide there. There's, I think, a marked difference between immigrants who came here when they were young and immigrants who came here after they were fully grown adults.
Correct. Yeah.
Right now, I forget which. I think you were a teenager maybe when you got here.
Oh yeah.
Is that right?
Much older.
Yeah. So that's different than if you got here when you were 5, or even when you were 10. Right. It's a different experience, and so there you go. We can subdivide these cohorts into smaller and smaller groups to get more precision, and that precision makes sense to me. But the larger sort of thing doesn't make sense to me at all. Now, you and I were at a conference recently where one of the things we discussed was actually petitioning the U.S. Census to remove or modify the way it categorizes or collects racial data, right? So it asks you what is your race, and it gives you a very limited set of potential responses, right? And what we were talking about during the conference was just changing the language slightly. So instead of saying, what is your race? It's asking, how are you racialized? Just to kind of take a step forward in this process of eliminating this category altogether. But so much of the conversation was about whether that actually ends up reinforcing the categories themselves, right? And then there's all this ambiguity about the subjectivity of how you're racialized. I couldn't answer the question.
Yes, I know.
How I'm racialized is really depending on the person, and I have no way of knowing, right? So some people insist that I'm black. Some people insist that I'm black. And some people insist, based on the things I've written and said, that I'm white.
Politically white. You're politically white.
Yeah, I'm politically white. And then some people insist that I'm mixed. Right? Like, people from the Dominican Republic, their ancestry goes to Europe and Africa. So I'm mixed. And that's what I have to write. But none of those things make any sense, But so I'm wondering if there's any reason at all to collect this data in that way. There's a tension within you even because you love data. You love collecting this stuff. You love categories. It's great for data. But what is the point of the data?
Yeah, I see. I exactly know what you are talking about. And let's talk about that census question. I don't think it ever get implemented because racialize, I actually tried something with many people. They don't know what is racialize. The word doesn't make sense for them. So, just people don't know how they are racialized. Like, I know I'm racialized. Everybody look at me, so you are Asian. Why I even care, right? Why should I care about how other people see me? But there is one thing quite progressive about that questionnaire. It's called I have no racial identity. I will click that box. But
Yeah.
I may click I'm racialized as Chinese because you see there is some competition because this data is important for someone else, for some civil rights activists. They want to use the number of 5 million Chinese to want to get some resource. And I very much know those most resources will not go to me or maybe do something against my interest. But still, there is a human sense of, I don't like the word solidarity, but maybe solidarity, they accomplish something because they share some similar trait of you. And I think that is something we need to overcome like this.
Yeah.
If we all overcome this natural urge of, I want to help my own people, we have to overcome that. Otherwise, we will all trap in this category forever. And a lot of time, and you say, I need to overcome this because I'm a researcher. I want that data, and I better give it up because the more I want it, and because if I create a box, it is generation to come. It's not just that I successfully put a box into census and I get my data. Oh, it will last 100 years. Then think about that.
I think there is some complexity to racialization, right? Because there's sometimes I enjoy being racialized as Chinese, and there's sometimes I don't. When I get pulled over for a speeding ticket, I hope the cop racialized me as Chinese. But when I'm trying to parallel park in public and everyone's staring at me, I hope I don't get racialized as Chinese. So it's very complex when I like getting racialized and when I don't. And I think it like ultimately this conversation is resting upon this idea of stereotypes that when we are all categorized this way and there's this overarching, identity that's thrust upon us, that we are subject to whatever, average that the entire category refers to. And sometimes they are good stereotypes, sometimes they are bad stereotypes. And in a way, we all get affected by it, even regardless of whether the identity exists, right? And so even if we don't identify that way, I think the reason why this question gets asked, which is how are you racialized, is because the idea is that how you are racialized by other people affects how you are treated.
Right.
How you are treated affects your experience of life in America. And so, there's just two ways to look at this, because so much of it is external, right? Like in a way, you don't really have a say. You don't really have a choice in how other people are seeing you, whether or not this category exists. Like Daisy, you were saying you hate it when other people make assumptions about you because you're Chinese. But at the end of the day, you don't really have a say in that. Like, how you are treated by other people. It's what they're going to see. And so there's that other complexity. And, I don't know how to resolve that.
Yeah. Daisy, feel free to respond to that, but just as we start to wrap up here too, I wanted to ask you about your goals as a filmmaker. You made this beautiful film, and now you're off in Los Angeles doing your thing. What do you see? Is this a topic that you're going to revisit? Is this something that's really personal to you, that you're connected to? You want to continue to say more about this sort of thing? And what is it that you have in mind?
Oh, that's actually a very good question, because, as filmmakers in school, you're always be pushed to make on your next project. And I just have this very interesting conversation with my roommate the other day, is what is my theme? What are the topics I like? And I found oftentimes I make films that tend to portray identity crisis, because I'm having experience in multiple countries, and just I have a lot of issues with myself. I really want to discuss the topic of who I really am, how I treated myself. And this also go with how I make this documentary with Ye, because we're all trying to figure out in this process, no matter who we're living, how can I better serve myself in my journey of life.
That sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
And it's funny because it's relatable. I think all of us will be able to connect to it. There's that human thing. Yeah, I it's such a funny thing because these categories are all made up, really, at the end of the day. And, as Melissa said, how you're seen affects how you're treated. But I think there's the extra step that people take. And let me know what you think about this. The extra step that people take is how they're treated is how they decide to see themselves. So there's
that
that
is
extra
actually
thing.
very interesting question.
Yeah. So
I like that because that's like taking the power back. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I get confused for Arab all the time. People literally walk up to me speaking Arabic and Greek. I live in an area in Queens where there's lots of Greek people. So I remember being at a supermarket and this older woman walks up to me. She's speaking Greek. I recognize it as Greek, but I don't know what she's saying. And she's just talking a mile a minute. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Greek. And she got really upset. And the reason she got upset is not because I'm not Greek. She got upset because she thinks I'm a Greek who doesn't speak Greek. That's the thing that upset her. Right. So that's the level of certainty that she had that I was Greek. But she's totally wrong. And now imagine me walking away going, man, I better start learning Greek because people see me as Greek. I better start internalizing that. That doesn't make any sense, but here we are. We do that all the time.
Yeah, I have a similar experience that one day I was in Boston. I think I was like at the government center or something. Like an old lady just came to me and started to speak Cantonese. He kept staying for like one whole minute. I was like so confused. I actually didn't even know how to respond her. It's like, do I respond you in English or do I respond you in Mandarin that I actually don't know a thing about Cantonese? That was something like one experience that was like pretty shocking to me. It was like, should I? Yeah, I have the same like personal like self-doubt. It's like, should I like really start to learn some Cantonese? Yeah. But no.
So that brings us back to the kind of overarching thing of, we have these broad policy groupings, for reasons of policy, we have these broad demographic groupings that end up creating, similar situations like that. Like, people expect you to vote a certain way, or people expect you to be of a certain socioeconomic status, or all of those things. But they're going to be wrong probably more often than they're right. And so it brings us back to the question, what's the point of collecting this data in the first place?
Yeah. And also grievances, right? It is a way to drum up a certain kind of shared grievance, right? By creating these identities, these big broad categories, and now even us Chinese who came much later get to kind of plug into this. There's this history of discrimination in the United States, and what happened with the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Japanese internment camps during World War II. We all get plugged into that grievance narrative, even though it's kind of like the same tensions within the African American community with descendants of slaves and more recent immigrants, say Caribbean Americans who came in more recently, and often if you look at outcomes that way, actually it's kind of different, right? Nigerian Americans, more recent Nigerian Americans, actually a very successful group versus if you look at descendants of slaves who've been here 200, 300 years, like it's their outcomes in American society actually, they vary quite widely.
I want to make a comment on that. You're right. There are many new Chinese immigrants. After they learn about Chinese food, honestly, we were shocked actually. And the human brain again make a pattern. There must be something alive, discrimination alive. I'm sure there are some anti-Chinese discrimination, but I feel people need to be aware. It's not everything, and everything is there is a conspiracy throughout history against Chinese. I think human brain loves this type of pattern, thinking, motivation, but we need to overcome that. If we feel there are discrimination, we need to sit down and say, what is the discrimination you feel now? Do you want to address it? How you want to address it? Rather than say, oh my God, this thing has been here since 1882 and 100 years even before that. I know not thinking that way, but I really worry the kids get to think that way because there are a lot of schools are teaching people to think you are racialized group of people. Actually, people of color means you are racialized. So you must have certain experience. It means you do not live a life as yourself, but you have some type of collective life because of the past of your ancestor. I respect people who want to think in that way, totally. But I feel I do not want my kid thinking that way. If something I experienced, some bully, some problem I experienced because of the China, American stuff, I want they see it as an outsider. They can feel sad for me as a human being. They can feel this shouldn't have happened to my mother or anybody. Chinese criminal act, this shouldn't have happened. But as a human being, they can feel outrageous by this act. They can feel outrageous by something else, not because their identity, but because their moral compass. That is how I would like to see this, because a lot of people, a lot of time when they see the organization I run, said Asian American for Equal Rights, you must only want Asian on board of it. I said, sorry, it's not the case. I make you feel upset because the names looks like very exclusive. And I would say it's an unfortunate situation because we didn't know better. If we can change the name, maybe we'll say human being or American for Asians,
people for equal rights,
or something, equal right for Asian descent. But when we make it Asian American for something, we are drawing a circle. I didn't realize that until I found many people think in a way very different from what I think. Because for me, that thing doesn't have meaning. I just want to make a name. My friend and I just say, make it a name, but we didn't realize it could stop so many people from joining a cause. Actually, maybe a lot of more people care about. Now we are exclude everybody. Exclusion act, I guess.
Well, Ye and Daisy, thank you so much for joining us today. Daisy, do you have any final thoughts before we take it away?
No, it's just like, because those are questions, I think, like, the amazing things that I know, I know everybody here is like, I'm still like in the process of learning, and it's like the fact that everybody has been providing me so many perspectives and things I actually never thought about is like quite amazing. I actually enjoy being a listener here because just like feeding me a lot of things. Because like going back to Melissa said earlier that she didn't know like she's Asian until like, you know, she came to US, and like I've been thinking for the past 30 minutes, like, oh damn, I never thought of that. Like when I talk to people, I'm not gonna say hi, I'm an Asian. It just like never ever happened to me before. I'm just like it gets like I think the racial thing is, for me as maybe an outsider coming to US, like starts to get like very confusing at a stage of like who I am, like Asian and like Asian, Chinese, whatever, blah, blah, blah. How should I identify myself? I think it's definitely causing a sort of like confusion on myself. So like I think throughout the way, and the message I'm trying to send in that documentary is like, we're still in this process of like figuring out, and it's not a very easy thing to do. It gets confusing. We definitely at one stage don't have the idea, but let's just like don't trap us in something that, and you just get this, because I think like identity is something that is like growing, change from time to time. So let's us just like give ourselves like a solid definition just right away.
Beautifully put. Daisy, Ye, thank you very much for joining us on Fair Perspectives. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Fair Perspectives. If you'd like to support the show, you can do it by subscribing on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platform, and leaving us a positive rating and review. You can also access exclusive podcast content, such as Q&As and bonus episodes, by visiting us and signing up at fairperspectives.org. For weekly FAIR news and opinion pieces by members of the FAIR community, visit our Substack at fairforall.substack.com, and tune into FAIR News Weekly wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to join or support the pro-human movement, visit us at fairforall.org/join us. Thanks again, and see you next time.